Today we're looking at a fencing book for beginners. Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel I review martial arts books and talk about other martial arts related subjects. The subject for today's review is Fencer's Startup, a beginner's guide to traditional and sport fencing. The author is Doug Werner. It was published in 1997. Doug Werner has authored or co-authored several books in his Startup Sport series. These include books on everything from sailing to skating to various forms of fighting. I'd say that the tone of the book overall is sort of light and informal. I'd say a slightly weird thing about the intro is that it seems as though the author is trying to convince you that fencing isn't lame, which is a weird tack to take because, dude, I've already picked up a fencing book. I clearly have some interest. Some of the early chapters cover things like basic etiquette, how to find a school. He's got 8 different points on that, including things like, is the loaner equipment clean, and is every student occupied during the length of the class. He also covers basic equipment, and there's an emphasis on getting a good mask, good helmet. When we get into the physical side of fencing, the earliest chapters are describing things like footwork. Some of this footwork is illustrated through the use of photography. Some of it is merely described. For instance, we get the basic advance and retreat and crossing over advance and retreat, but there are other things that we don't get. For instance, a balestra is described as a jumping, advancing lunge. We don't get any photography of that at all. And that's just an example of how sometimes something will be described, but not actually shown. This is something that we do find throughout the book, although I will give it credit in that most of the basics do get photographs. Now, throughout most of this book, I will note that the weapons are illustrated with shrouds on them. So to me, these look like perhaps pieces of PVC pipe, very thin, that have been stuck over the blades of the weapons, which are the foil, the epee, and the saber. And this is so we can see them being used more easily. In the section on safety and equipment, the author does note that the only reason that the people in the illustrations aren't using masks is because, number one, the blades are being covered up, and number two, they are in still poses. They are not actively going for things. There is an emphasis on, if you are going to be using a blade, wear a mask, wear protection. As I mentioned, there are 3 weapons used in fencing. There's the foil, which is the smaller of the weapons. There's the epee, which is larger. And then there's the saber, which has a saber grip, sort of a knuckle guard, and uses more cutting motions. In this book, the foil gets the most coverage. The author notes that most people begin with the foil, so that's probably why we're starting with this. I think it also probably gets the most coverage because a lot of things that are covered in the foil section would become redundant if they got covered in the other sections. As far as what gets covered, we get the basic target area, which for the foil is basically the front of the chest guard. It also covers the idea of right of way, which, despite reading this in other fencing books, is still sort of bizarre to me. But right of way basically means that the fencer who extends their arm first gets to attack first. He also covers the basic gripping of the foil, as well as the different lines or quadrants that one will be attacking and defending. So, as you can see from this illustration, the target area is divided into 4 different quadrants or lines, and each of these is defended with a different sort of parry. And again, those get covered in here as well. He also covers the basic attacks, like the thrust as well as the lunge, which is, again, you're thrusting, but you're taking a deep step forward as you're doing it. The defenses, in addition to the basic parries that get covered, also include some counters like the riposte. So You defend against the opponent's attack and then counter immediately off of it. You also get various types of blade manipulations. So for instance, there's something called a beat, where you knock your opponent's blade aside before going in with an attack. And he also covers different forms of attack, for instance, combination attacks. And that's pretty much exactly what it sounds like, attacking at one line and then attacking at a different line. After the foil section is the épée section. The épée utilizes pretty much the entire body as a target, and it also has a larger guard, a larger bell. So that is used more extensively in defense. He notes in this part that as opposed to fencing with a foil, you need to be more aware that your arm can be attacked if you're trying to extend it. Unlike the foil, apparently there is no right of way when it comes to épée fencing. However, that does show up again when it comes to saber fencing, which is the next chapter. Saber fencing involves a lot of cuts. Thrusts are still included, but because of its design, the saber is primarily used to cut at different targets. For this, the upper body again is a target, but unlike with the foil, but as with the épée, the arms are included as a target area here. He notes that one needs to have a good, well-fitting helmet if one is going to participate in saber fencing, because one of the main attacks is going to be a cut to the head. So you need to make sure that your mask fits well and doesn't bang down on you when the guy comes in with a cut. There's also a chapter in this book on sport fencing, which the author differentiates from Olympic fencing. He says that this is mostly based on saber fencing and that it's very much laid back. I haven't looked into this extensively. I don't know if this is a thing that actually exists beyond his particular club or perhaps a small community. Following that and taking up a good chunk of the book, the author gives us a journal of sorts. It's over 50 pages long. It describes the author's first 5 months in fencing. Now, I think it's probably been a little bit more dramatized than a standard journal would be. It wasn't like, day one, I sure sweat a lot. At this point, the author is more or less telling a story. Truthfully, this was one of the more difficult parts for me to follow. I just wasn't that interested in it. That could be a failing on my part. Other people might be more interested, so please don't let me yuck your yum if this is the sort of thing you enjoy. And I can see how a beginner could really get into it. Don't let the fact that it bored me deter you. Finally, the book finishes with a little bit about the history of sword fighting and fencing in Europe. It includes a timeline, and we also get a glossary, and although this is very old information at this point, it also includes lists of resources for people who are brand new to fencing for them to get further into it. As far as the prose go, I think this is a decent introduction into fencing. I think it's pretty accessible for folks on the ground level. I like how the author emphasizes the importance of drills and repetitions, and he does give ideas for different drills throughout. And as I mentioned, even though it didn't really do anything for me, I think that the journal section might be useful to help some beginners connect with the experience of being new in the sport of fencing. As far as the cons go, I think there is a disadvantage to not having all the techniques illustrated. I brought up specifically some of the footwork that wasn't illustrated. There are also instances where various attacks are not illustrated as well. I can understand, if this is just meant to be an introduction, why that might be too extensive for what the book was trying to get out. But if you're going to list it, please show it to me. So I was disappointed that there weren't more illustrations of things like that. I also really didn't like the tone. All due respect to the author, a lot of this to me felt like a guy who was trying too hard to make a joke and it didn't work. It just didn't work for me. As I mentioned up front, he begins the book by basically trying to talk you into the idea that fencing isn't lame after you've already picked up a book on fencing. There's another section where he's like, yes, I know drilling sounds hard. And like, it didn't until you told me that it did. I didn't like that. He also misspelled Errol Flynn's name and frankly was using a reference that I don't think even in 1997 most of his audience would have gotten. Errol Flynn was an actor from the golden age of Hollywood who was in a bunch of swashbuckling movies. Like, he portrayed Zorro as well as Robin Hood, but here he's called Errol Flynn. It's not E-A-R-L. His name was Errol, E-R-R-O-L. As far as recommendations go, as I said, I think this book is pretty accessible for beginners. I don't know if there are better, more accessible fencing books out there as far as beginner work goes. It's not so bad. Like I said, the tone made it difficult for me to get through it, but that is very much a personal preference thing. There are people out there who I'm sure will enjoy that, or at least who won't be as bothered as much by it as I was. So if you are a beginner and want to get into fencing, I think this probably has some good ideas. I think it might be a good ground floor type of book. Anyway, that's all I have for this week. Thank you for following along with me. I have a Ko-fi account where if you want to help out the channel, you're free to donate there, or if you have an idea for a book for me to review, you can also request that by donating to my Ko-fi account. And that's all I got for this week. Thanks again. I'll see you guys later.